I'm Zayne D'Crus. I've worked in communications and storytelling across health, international development, emergency management, and now finally I'm working in the homelessness sector. I've worked with Australian Volunteers International and Australian Red Cross for a number of years. Worked in countries like Timor-Leste, in Indonesia, in Cambodia, in Kenya, Mongolia. And what I've done is really support people in those countries to be able to tell their own stories in their own way. My focus when I've been going into every community is what is actually happening on the ground. And a lot of the stories I've had to tell have been about connecting the work that's happening on the ground in a community with a group of people who are funding that work, but don't really understand it. And the story is the way to bring those people together. And so what you really want to do is try and encourage people in the community to talk about the realities of their lives, the good things about them, the hard things about them, what makes things difficult, what would help, and then to look at how the solution is actually working in practice. And what I've seen is that the role of somebody from Australia going in and doing that is becoming less and less important. And it's a really good thing because I was starting to see really talented local storytellers emerging who could do that job much better than somebody from Australia could. I've actually realized that the role of communications in the policy and advocacy space is really, really important. You are all policymakers. Therefore, you are all storytellers at heart. Storytelling comes naturally to you because you're trying to affect change. The reason you want to bring a human element to policy is because policy has a consequence on human life. And so you want to be able to show, using a real human story, the difference between that policy being implemented or being missing. And the more you can connect it to somebody's real life and the real problems they have, the better you're going to be able to have your viewer understand the practical implications of what you're saying. One of the best examples I've seen of a Pacific Island nation changing the narrative around its communications was way back during Cyclone Winston in Fiji, and would have been about 2016, 2017. So there was a whole practice of people from very well-meaning Western countries loading up boxes with random things and sending them to the Pacific. What tended to happen was you'd have a disaster and then your ports were crowded with people's unwanted crap. And all of the charity organizations were trying to push back against this narrative and say to people, guys, please donate money. And then more well-meaning Australians would write back in and go, no, I'm sure they'd want those things. And what ultimately started to change the tide were people in Fiji making videos of things they were unpacking. And so they were holding up things like fluffy bunnies and high-heeled shoes and going, what did we do with this? And actually having that footage, those shots, those stories, made people realize how ridiculous it was and how counterproductive it was. My advice for people translating complex policy is to start with values. So when you're speaking to your audience, you find the thing that everybody values and then build your message from there. And then you could move on to why you might need that and how you might go about it. But you start with the thing that people value most. I think the best way to encourage people to act is not to try and shame them, not to try and ramp up urgency if it's not there, but to make them feel empowered to do something about the problem you've just helped them understand. So have a real think about what your call to action is. I recently did a few years with a medical research alliance, and it taught me quite a lot about communication in a very specialist space. And one of the really interesting things about it was that it is so specialist that it's not understood by even the other people in that space. And so your role is you're constantly helping people to be effective translators. A translator is not just someone who repeats a message in another language. The translator is someone who thinks about how to frame that to somebody who looks at the world in a slightly different way. And that's actually a really important role in policy development and policy making, is how you frame your issue in a way that will be understood and appreciated by a minister who has to make a decision, a business leader that maybe has to do something different, a donor who maybe has to fund your thing over something else. So you're constantly thinking about how do I translate what I'm saying to that person so it will be relevant to them. My advice for a spokesperson is you want to try and make a connection. You don't want to come across like you're reading a script, even when it's something really important. In fact, the more important your issue is, the more you want to try and make a human connection to the person who's watching. So have a couple of key messages in mind but try your best not to read them. Try and look up, make eye contact with people, speak the things that you know are important.